Welcome to the Giving Down podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Roberts, and my goal is to share stories of hope and generosity in our wonderful community of Newburgh. This podcast is sponsored by my real estate team, the Joyful Roberts Group. We're licensed brokers with Premier Property Group. If you're considering making a move or selling your home within the next year, reach out to me on thejoyfulrobertsgroup.com, and I'd be happy to help answer your questions and help you sell your home. In this episode, I'm interviewing Letha and Amanda with Henderson House, Yamhill County's only local shelter and advocacy center for victims and survivors of domestic and sexual violence. In this episode, we discuss the services offered by Henderson House and also discuss many of the complexities involved in abusive situations, such as the cycle of abuse, which we cover in depth, as well as the power and control wheel. April is also Sexual Assault Awareness Month, so this is an excellent resource and opportunity to educate yourself and the people that you know. I would also like to provide a trigger warning, as some of the content in this episode may be triggering to individuals who have experienced abuse. Well, we've got a lot to cover in today's episode, so let's get started. Thank you, Letha and Amanda, for joining me today. I've been looking forward to interviewing representatives of Henderson House for a long time, so I'm really looking forward to today's episode.
Thank you for having me. We really appreciate you having us and very excited to do this podcast with you.
Yeah, so the reason I wanted to do Henderson House is because people experiencing sexual assault, domestic violence, even though I have not experienced that personally, I have young kids, I have a wife who I very much care about, and it's just something that's really unthinkable to me. Yet at the same time, I can understand that life is hard and that people act out in ways. So one way or another, I really want everyone listening to this podcast to know about the resource that you guys provide. That's a resource for all of Yamhill County, for people in Newburgh, not just in Bentonville. And there's a lot of other things I'm really looking forward to covering. So with that said, and kind of why I want to do this, we can jump right into you sharing about Henderson House. So how did Henderson House get started? What's your guys' mission? Why do you do what you do?
So Henderson House was started by Mary Henderson, and that was in 1981. It was basically a group of survivors who knew that there were victims out there in the community and needed help, and these women wanted to help. So Mary Henderson started the crisis line and started working with survivors. And our mission is providing culturally aware outreach, education, and services for victims of domestic and sexual violence through leadership, hope, and respect for thriving families. So Henderson House is the only community-based nonprofit for resource center for domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. We also work with victims of trafficking. We have 4 different advocates that are in the office. We have a youth advocate, a DHS co-located advocate, sexual assault advocate, who's me, and a shelter advocate. And so we work with the whole community of Yamhill County, and we provide resources and services to clients who need us, who are experiencing violence in their home or in their lives.
Yeah. There's a lot of great information that you just shared. I think it maybe could help to break some of that down a little bit. One of the first things you said that kind of struck me was providing culturally aware outreach. So what does it mean that your outreach is culturally aware?
So we work really hard with different community partners that are culturally based. And we have 2 bilingual advocates that both speak Spanish and English. Any of the services that we provide, we definitely try to provide them in other languages also. And we are working on opening up a language line so that we can serve more in their culture. That hasn't quite happened yet, but that's what we do.
Yeah. And so you're the only shelter and the only real community advocate in all of Yamhill County. Is that correct?
Yes. So we're the only shelter for domestic violence, sexual assault, violence of any kind, basically.
Okay.
And within Yamhill County. And the reason for that is funding. The federal government doesn't have a lot of money to provide shelters in each little town. And so the way that they've set it up is that they help pay for a shelter in each county. And so in each county, all across the United States, there's one shelter for domestic violence and sexual assault.
And I think that's important to understand because you guys are based in McMinnville, which is fairly central to Yamhill County. But I wonder if sometimes people who experience domestic violence or sexual assault think that because they're not in McMinnville that they aren't eligible, don't reach out. Do you ever experience that?
That is often the case. It's unfortunate that that people think that way. And we will also serve or work with clients that come from other counties, depending on the case. So, but it makes it hard for Henderson House. Our shelter is only a 13-body shelter at one time. So to work with other counties might be putting somebody in our county out.
Right.
And we don't want to do that. So it does pose to be hard on clients if they feel like, say a client lives in Lafayette, and I've had this happen to where they feel like they're not eligible for services in McMinnville because they live in such a small town, but they're still in our county and we're still here to help them.
Yeah. And that's something that's, I don't think can be stressed enough that no matter where you are in Yamhill County, and I know this podcast is about Newburgh, but anything that serves Newburgh, that's Yamhill County wide, I think is important to share and get this message out. Because there's such great resources, and that's really why I'm doing this podcast. There's so many great resources that are available that people just don't know about. And if you're busy with life, you're maybe raising kids, you're dealing with all the dynamics of being abused, you may not be aware of everything that's out there. So my hope with this is that people listening who are aware, know people who are at risk, whatever, can send the podcast and say, hey, are you familiar with this? Even though I know not everyone listens to podcasts, but as many ways as we can outreach and get the word out about what you guys do, I think is really important.
And we really appreciate that too. We agree that we do need a better way of getting the word out. There's a lot of people in the community that don't understand that Henderson House is open and we're ready and we're here to serve you any way that we can.
Yeah. So what does this look like? I mean, so someone's experiencing some kind of abuse. They hear about Henderson House. Then what happens next? What's kind of that typical progression?
So from that moment, we would hope that the individual would reach out to us. As soon as we get that phone call, we're going to talk about, just tell me what's going on, what's been happening. And as the individual reveals more and more about what's happening in their home, in their relationship, or in their lives, then we can help them navigate through that. The biggest thing that we do is we're resource.
Yeah. We
have lots and lots and lots of resources. And it's not just community resources, it's also resources on parenting, on parenting through abuse. That is really difficult. And we do support groups. So the goal in support groups is to get them into the office so that they're feeling supported on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
That helps also.
Do you ever find that when people call that they're maybe reluctant or hesitant to share information about what's actually going on?
Absolutely. The biggest thing, it's really, really hard for somebody to say the person that I love or that I thought loved me is hurting me. And once those words come out of their mouth, reality sets in.
Yeah.
And that's hard for them.
So how do they kind of navigate around that? I mean, so they call, they know there's an issue, but they're maybe afraid of admitting it to even themselves. So how do they? So
at that moment, I myself as an advocate, I would start talking about our confidentiality clause and why that's so important. Henderson House advocates by law are non-mandatory recorders. And what that means is that you can reach out to me and you can tell me what's going on in your home or in your family. And I'm not going to run and tell anybody else and get you into trouble. I'm going to talk to you and I'm going to support you through that. And if there's abuse that's happening in the home, I'm going to support you to where you can make that report on your own.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important for individuals to understand that Henderson House advocates, we're not here to get you in trouble.
Yeah.
We're here to support you. We're here to walk the walk with you and give you as much resources as we can during your healing process.
And one of in my limited understanding of abuse, that it's very difficult to, like you said, admit that there actually is an issue, because especially if you're living with someone and you're blending your life with this person, you want things to work out, you want things to be right. And it's not black and white. As the general community, we'd like to think that it's just this black and white thing, like, kind of the old cartoons used to show, there's a villain and they're doing terrible things and they're bad people, and therefore, it's just this easy decision. They go to jail and you get help move on with your life. But it's complicated. It's from my understanding, very rarely is it actually that way, where it's just, do you experience that?
It's not abuse all the time, though. The abuse is, so if we were to put it in a timeline of, say, 30 days, the abuse could happen 2 days out of that 30 days. And all of the other 28 days are romancing, are promises that they're going to change and that they're never going to do it again. The cycle of abuse starts with intimidating and kind of like you're walking on eggshells. You don't know when the teapot's gonna blow. You know? And then there's the incident of abuse. And then after the incident of abuse, there's a honeymoon stage. And that honeymoon stage, the abuser is swooning and doing everything they can to make their victim submissive and coerce their victim into believing that they're sorry and that they're not ever going to do it again.
So that sounds like there's a lot of manipulation and gaslighting that goes on.
A lot of mind control and a lot of gaslighting, and this isn't really me. You made me do this. I'm so sorry. I'm never going to do it again. And the victim wants to believe that. Yeah. The victim fell in love with this person. They want to believe that this person loves them.
Yeah. So then someone who's experiencing that, I'm sure it takes a huge amount of effort or to even reach out and ask for help when maybe they think that it's their fault.
That's one thing that we tell them. The first thing that I tell them when they call is, you've done a great job today. Mm-hmm. You've done amazing work. You have reached out to us on your own. You've made a phone call. And maybe that hasn't gotten you out of the relationship, but that's the first step to getting out. And they've done that on their own. So we always want to promote everything that the victim has done on their own. That's one of the biggest reasons that we say we're going to walk beside you and we're going to support you, is because we want to provide them with autonomy. We want to provide them with what was taken away from them.
So when a survivor comes through our door, I think probably their biggest fear is the fear of the unknown. Not knowing if they're going to be believed, not knowing if what they're going through could potentially, take their kids from them. When they leave, maybe the abuser's the sole provider. So financially, they can't afford to leave. And so they're trying to make things smoothed over. But with domestic violence, it's all about the power and control. And the abuser is going to hold on to that in any way, whether it's financial abuse, there's religious abuse, the emotional, the verbal, not all of it's physical. And so it makes it hard, I think, just not knowing to the extent of what's going to happen next. And then we can tell them, give them all these resources and let them know what's available for them. But ultimately, the choice is theirs, and they have to believe that they're going to be okay when they leave us.
Yeah.
And so that's why, it's really important that we're 100% confidential, that we start by believing, and we're just going to believe what they tell us. We work really hard to not have them have to tell their story multiple times. We try to have it one advocate that's involved. We don't want them to go into that every time. We have our DHS co-located that can help if kids are involved and the fear of losing them because, this abuser lives with them, whatever that looks like. We have an advocate to, as soon as they come in for services at DHS and disclose domestic violence, we have an advocate on site that's going to be there to walk through it.
Does it ever come as a surprise to people to know that it's like what they experience that most people kind of experience, or at least many people experience kind of that same thing that, hey, you've been manipulated, you've been, this is something that is common. It's not just you. Do people sometimes get surprised that?
Sometimes. I mean, that's kind of the importance of our support group, is because it's peer-to-peer. They're open groups, and it's kind of just hearing others talk about what they may be going through, and just to reassure that they're not alone.
Yeah.
And that it happens. Because it definitely happens. If it's not happening in their life, it's happening to someone they know. It's very prevalent. And so just kind of knowing what is needed and what is available, I mean, that's going to help you get through it. I know myself personally, like, I had a fear of losing my kids, because I was like, he was the sole provider. And, if me and my kids are homeless, or we go into homeless shelter. And at the time it was like, there was limits on kids and their ages. And so it's like, you can't make the decision to go into a program that's only going to benefit 3 of your 4 kids because your kids are too old to bring in, or something like that.
So you have to feel like you have to go through experiencing the abuse because it's the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
Yeah. And then just the fear of the unknown. And one thing I'm really firm on when speaking with survivors is the fear is as real as it is to them. It's not my fear that I'm worried about, it's theirs. And they are going to know if, that one look by him is going to cost her something later, or whatever that situation may be. And so we've got to believe, and we've got to just kind of meet them where they're at on their fear level, whether, even if there's no physical, there's something that's been instilled in them that causes that fear. So.
And, my thought goes to, one, it's extremely important to have a resource like Henderson House when people experience this, and knowing that they have a place to go. And I want to get more into some of the resources that you provide, but I think about often, what's going on in these, I'm guessing most of the perpetrators are men, right? That's the assumption. I don't know, it sounds like there's probably not stats. But what goes on in these people's lives that they are abusing to this degree? It's not like, from a childhood, there's like, I'm going to grow up and be an abuser when I grow up. But obviously, there's still the responsibility and there's accountability that they need to be held to. But I just think, what's going on in our culture and society that is raising these boys and men to then manipulate and gaslight and abuse the people that are trusting them with their lives?
So I can just say a little bit about that. I have a teen daughter who, at her high school, they joke about these social media sites that the kids have created, and they post pictures. They walk around school and they randomly take pictures of individuals, and then they post them on the site. One is called the Hot Girl site. Another one has pictures of just people, like one of them was a teacher who was bent down and his back end was showing over his pants, and the kids took this picture and they put it on this website. Well, my daughter, after having a conversation with her and explaining that what consent is, and that it's not okay to take pictures of people and put them on a website without their consent. And she says, but we have a clause on there that says, if you don't want your picture up here, just tell us and we'll take it down. And so I had to explain to her how the damage is already done. You might think that it's okay to put that clause on there, but you've already done the damage. And so a lot of it is, I'm going to say ignorance, and that's because they don't understand that there's real meaning to using words to hurt somebody. And part of my sexual assault awareness campaign is building safe online spaces. And that means learning how to intervene when you see something that's not okay. Simple words that slander somebody that a child uses to slander another child
or adults
or adults
experiencing all
they grow up to perform those words.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
So when we talk about the root cause of violence, oppression is very much a cause. I mean, gender, when it comes to gender, when it comes to poverty, even not being aware of what they have access to, or maybe it's someone who is undocumented and the fear of being deported or something comes into play when they go to make that report. When we look at stats about, who primarily is an abuser, it's kind of an old stat, but when you think about who's been victims as a child and grows up, whether they grow up to abuse, well, it's right around 70% of victims who experience it in childhood grow up to be an abuser. 30% is not. It's very little number. I don't know what that is today. That's an older number. But I think a lot of it is just kind of stereotypes and the stigma and everything kind of being involved. And then when you look at the stats, so 70% versus 30, then you look at perpetrators being held accountable when it comes to rape, less than 1% does any prison time or jail time when it comes to a rape charge. And so it's really hard for victims to come forward when they're not getting any justice in that.
Yeah. And then perhaps even fear that if they do, that's going to cause even more problems if their abuser finds out.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow.
And that's part of our safety planning, if they are planning to leave or even kind of protection order, like just making sure that they make everything look as normal as possible at home to not tip them off, because it can go from 1 to 10 very easily, especially in that tip off.
Do you ever find that there's, because and I'm sure there's kind of a cycle you mentioned of abuse where there's then the honeymoon stage and making these promises. Do you ever find that there are people who they're struggling, they've been abused, they recognize I need help. I don't want to do this, but it's you just find yourself making this terrible choice. You're I really didn't want to do that. There's some level of manipulation, sure, but it's also I really want to change, but maybe there's so much shame they don't even know how. Are there resources? Maybe it's Henderson House, maybe it's somewhere else. For someone who's okay, I want help. I want to change it. I want to keep doing this. I want to keep hurting because I really do care about this person. I keep finding myself. Maybe this is a minority of people who think this way, but how is the only option prison time for them?
Right.
And maybe that's what's needed. But there might be other options that can work to partner with people and help. You need counseling. One, here, deal with the hurt that you've experienced so that you can find healing, so that you're not going to then continue that on generations to come.
And honestly, that's what it is the healing that has to happen. And not always in every situation can you allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Lutheran Community Services here locally do work with offenders and have classes available to maybe kind of break that cycle or work with them as to, to become something that they're not wanting to be as far as the abuse goes. But also a lot of that is sometimes being forced, right? They got a citation, they got arrested, and so part of yours is going through this. And if they're not ready to change, it doesn't really do a whole lot of good.
Yeah.
And so, it's just bringing that awareness and identifying the need for support for survivors out there.
So I know that was kind of a tangent. Ultimately, we guys are about for the people who are experiencing this and that. So I apologize for looking up time, but that's just something I think about. And I think it's just, I just want it to stop. It's making me so mad. I want this to stop. You guys have said at one point, you'd rather not have a job in this industry. You'd rather it not be an issue. And I also, so that's just, I always kind of think from the root things, but ultimately what I want to focus on kind of from here on out is, okay, that said, it'd be great if abuse didn't happen. Sad fact, reality, it happens and it always will happen. And unfortunately, there probably always will need to be this resource. So what are other ways that you guys help? I know you shared a lot about resources, education, shelter. I guess one of the things actually I wanted to, I don't know if we touched on this already, is some of the common misconceptions people have about people experiencing abuse.
So I think the biggest one is the misconception that, had the victim left, that abuse would stop. And that kind of goes under, like, why didn't she just leave? Well, if it was that simple, then she probably would have just left. But there's a lot that goes into it. And so I feel like it's victim blaming for someone to say, why didn't she just leave? Because that's not easy at all. It takes 7 to 14 times. That's pretty common. And that, abuse doesn't discriminate. So it doesn't matter if you're homeless living on the streets or you're the richest in Yamhill County, abuse can happen, and it does happen. People in high positions abuse, and some people think, like, if you're rich or you're in the middle class, like, abuse doesn't happen, you'll be fine. That's not always the case. And again, it doesn't discriminate. So it doesn't matter where you come from. Abuse can hit you. The other misconception is that predominantly, women are victims. That makes sense. But men are victims too. And we're there to help them as well, including all of our services, housing, any of that stuff. And so, that's kind of some of the misconceptions, is that abuse, only happens to certain people. Had the victim left, that they'd be okay. And then men don't get abused, because they absolutely do.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of some of that.
So one of the biggest myths that really gets to me is, well, if it's not physical violence, then she's really not being abused. And I couldn't say enough about this. Emotional and mental violence is really, really difficult for a victim to get past. And that is a lot of reasons why they stay, is because they have been manipulated emotionally and mentally. And sometimes it's harder to get out of that than it is if you've got bruises on your face. You can physically see those bruises and you know that they're unhealthy and you're going to leave. But whenever your brain is being victimized, that makes it even harder, because you don't know what's true and what's not true.
Yeah.
And it really does take a lot to be able to get past that.
Well, the stats show, like you said, 7 to 14 times for someone to leave. I think maybe the reason people think, well, why did you just leave? It's because we think of ourselves as having, or someone who doesn't experience abuse thinks, well, if someone were to do that to me, I would, well, it's because it's not happening to you. It's happening to someone who's been manipulated for a long time. It's not about just out of the blue, someone just comes and, beats you up or rapes you or whatever. That's, my guess is rarely.
Right. And it's, it's easy to grab your keys and go get in your car and leave. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, when you're in this kind of abusive relationship, it's not that easy to grab your keys and go.
Yeah.
Sometimes your keys are hidden. Sometimes your car is tampered with.
Wow.
Sometimes the brake line is cut. Are you safe enough to get in your car and leave? And the victims, all of that goes through their mind constantly. So the fear of leaving can outweigh the need to leave.
Wow.
And that makes a huge difference too.
Yeah. What is the one message that, if you could share to our community as a whole, that you'd want to say?
I think the most important message is that victims need help.
Right.
And they need intervention. They need people to speak up. And don't speak up in front of the abuser, but just say, hey, I can see what you're going through. And if you want to give me a call whenever you're safe to do so, I'd love to sit down and talk to you.
Yeah. What are some ways that people could recognize signs of abuse? Because if someone doesn't want to share it, maybe doesn't even know, how can we as a community watch out for those signs and recognize when we should approach them and say, hey, I'm noticing this? Or
So what we know about abusers is they prey on vulnerabilities. So someone who maybe has been a victim in the past, or their self-esteem has been damaged in some way, and they're walking with their head down and not really making eye contact with people, that's who an abuser is going to go after. That's the vulnerability that is that they look for. And so just like increasing awareness, letting them know that we're out here, building up their own strength to move forward, to have their head held high and make those eye contacts is huge. Everything about a survivor's identity can be damaged. And so just letting them know that, Henderson House is there to support them. We understand that abusers don't abuse in front of other people. So family support isn't always there because they don't believe it.
Yeah.
And so knowing that they have the option to come here to get the help, I think is huge.
Yeah. And I noticed there's two words kind of used interchangeably, survivor and victim. What is the distinction and why is that?
So, and we all kind of have our own, and I try to stick with one and I do change them. So this is what I look at. I feel a victim is currently in crisis. They're in it. They need the support, the healing. A survivor has some healing or all healing done. They've worked through it. Their vulnerabilities, they've understood them. They're kind of out of it. And then there's like a thriver or a warrior is what we call them. And that's someone a lot of our staff is kind of there. We've experienced it. We've learned, we've healed, and we're at a spot that we're ready to give back and offer that support and healing to others.
Okay.
And so that's I use victim and survivor very interchangeably. But I do feel like there's a little bit of a difference.
No, I didn't doubt that. It makes sense though. And I appreciate that because it's not all the same and there's stages of healing and all of that.
And then also system-based, they'll use victim because, they've been victimized and so they're a victim. So kind of depending on what they're going through at the time is how we kind of use words interchangeably.
And one thing I just thought of too, speaking of the education and the resources and this information, earlier we talked about the cycle of abuse. I was wondering if we could touch on that before our time's over.
So the cycle of abuse usually starts with tension in the home. The abuser is normally very on edge. The victim can feel that, might say things or give specific looks that will tell the victim that he or she is on edge and likely getting ready to blow up, right? So the victim starts, being very careful with the words that they use or how they're walking or what they're doing in the home. And it becomes almost like they're walking on eggshells. And this could last for several days. It could last for several weeks. And then the incident happens. So once the incident happens, it could be, a span of all day long. And then, the victim finds themselves on the floor because the perpetrator hurt them. And then once that incident happens, the perpetrator goes into a honeymoon stage as to where they're apologetic. I'm so sorry. They might go out and spend money on the victim. They might, buy the victim a brand new wardrobe or a brand new car. My abuser bought me a car after the incident. So it happens. And that's the honeymoon phase. And then the honeymoon phase could last, a month. It could last 6 months. And then all of a sudden, those looks start coming from the abuser again. And the abuser, they started drinking a beer every night after work to where during the honeymoon phase, they didn't drink anything. So then the victim automatically knows the tension time is coming again.
Yeah.
And so that's the cycle: tension, violence, and then the honeymoon phase. And we also use a power and control wheel. And the reason that we use this power and control wheel is because we want the victim to be able to visualize what's happening to them. And oftentimes during the power and control, the abuser will use coercion and threats, either threatening the victim, threatening something that they love dearly, their pets, their pets. And then, using intimidation, and And that's all about emotional abuse right there. And oftentimes they'll use isolation. So like whenever earlier you had asked, how do we spot somebody that's being abused? Oftentimes they're going to be isolated away from their family and friends. All of a sudden they don't have time for their friend, or, they're not going to Sunday night dinner anymore. That's a sign of abuse, because the abuser is isolating them away from all of their support system. And the reason why is because they're trying to wipe away all of their support so they listen to just the abuser. And so they use a lot of minimizing, denying, and blaming. Well, if you hadn't have said that, I wouldn't have hit you. They use their children against them a lot. I signed over my children for fear of my life. And so it happens a lot. They'll threaten to take the children away, or they're going to call CPS, or I'm going to call the police right now. They'll put them into a position where the emotions are heightened, and then say they call the police. And the victim is being reactive to what's happening to her, but the police don't understand that this is reaction. This is not abuse.
Yeah.
So sometimes they both are deemed the abuser.
Wow.
And the abuser doesn't abuse because of being angry or anything. It's all power and control. They're absolutely aware of what's
very aware of what they're doing at this moment. This is very on point. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're going to put that victim in a position to where that victim is going to lose everything.
Wow.
And make her believe make her believe that they're going to lose everything.
Wow. So I think it may give people too much benefit of the doubt. And is this pretty much when you see people, is it pretty much always this or way?
Yeah, multiple times. I mean, it could be 5 different things on here, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to see a lot of what's on here. And I would encourage anybody just to Google power and control wheel. And that's all it is a power and control wheel. And it'll help people understand what victims go through to be subjected to all of this mind control and intimidation and emotional abuse. And then to try to say, am I capable of leaving? No, they've had all of this mind control done to them. They don't feel safe enough to leave.
So wonder that they even are able to leave after 7 or 14 times. I mean, if they're going through that much manipulation and isolation, and I mean, even maybe in cases, Stockholm syndrome, where they think, well, this is, it's really not that bad or whatever.
They trauma bonding.
Yeah. What was that?
So we do see what we call trauma bonding, where the victim even though it's really bad, and we see this a lot with like a trafficker, their victim, they have made it really bad, but they have a bond with them, even though it's really bad for them. They've bonded to that individual as somewhat of a safe person, and that's kind of hard to say, but it does happen. The manipulation can be bad enough to where the victim is bonded to that individual, and they're going to stay with that individual, and they're going to support that individual because that's who they've bonded to, even though the trauma is horrendous that they're experiencing. And so we do see that at times, but even that, it comes down to power and control. Yeah, and that's really what abuser uses. And so it's however they can get to their victim to manipulate, to brainwash, to do whatever is needed.
So how do you even, if someone's gone through that, how do you even help a person at that point?
Journaling.
Yeah, just showing them options and encouraging them to make a decision, bringing that awareness. There's lots of information out there and just that are facts. And so just kind of giving them that. And what we know is, there is 3 top times where an individual is most at risk for homicidal violence or murder-suicide. And one of them is when a divorce is final, because they're taking away that power control. He has no more control. So that very often is a time. Another one is when the survivor has actually left or they're getting ready to leave. And an abuser knows that could put him at risk. And then when a woman is pregnant is another one. And that sounds horrible, but then...
Because it is.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and it's because there's something else taking attention away from the abuser, and the power controls is too much for that abuser. And because the survivor is now growing as a human being and having to pay attention, that's not what they want, because they are in control of that person.
Which I'm sure could even lead to manipulation and coercion into getting abortions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or getting them pregnant to stay, right? Yeah. Now you're having my baby. Now you're you're kind of safe for 18 years, right?
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing all of this. I could talk about this for a long time, just because it's something that I really want people to understand. It's not just cut and dry. It's not just, oh, you're abused, you go and get help, which is when people are at that point, that's when you can really help is in getting the support. But I think even getting people to reach out, it sounds like that's really, once someone's calling Henderson House, they're going to get what they need.
Yes.
But how do we get people to recognize you actually do need to call? Because many people think that they don't need to, or it's their fault. I really appreciate you sharing all of this and educating me and everyone listening. So what are ways that we talked about how we can fight abuse as a community, but how can we get involved specifically with Henderson House? What you guys are doing?
So we have a lot of opportunities. One of them is volunteering for the agency. We love our volunteers. We have a volunteer coordinator, and that can look all kinds of ways. We do have, to be an advocate, you have a 40-hour certified training that you go through. We have the ability to set that up online with someone so that when completion of that is done, there is services that can be provided. We always need help on the crisis line after hours, support groups, just day-to-day activities. Someone just sitting at the front desk answering the phone is super helpful when it comes to like crises being there. And we have a board of directors. We're always recruiting for them as well. We take on internships with different colleges. There is fundraising activities that we do or we accept. So someone can just do a fundraiser for Henderson House, whether it's paper products, hygiene items, or cash, or whatever that looks like, because that's going to go towards serving the clientele that we serve. And then hosting, or kind of like this, an awareness event, where we're just kind of there and answering questions and getting our services out there so that they can pass that on to someone in need. We do a lot of outreach events. So anytime there's an event that we can table, let us know. We'll be there.
I'm supposed to come train your agency.
Yes, Letha's going to finish that one.
You can always ask us to come and train your agency. We would love to come in and give your agency an overview of what Henderson House does and how you could help victims out there.
And I mean, even in saying that reminds me of just some things. I mean, in corporations, even in sexual assault awareness, just in businesses, and among civil structures that you would not expect there to be sexual abuse or domestic abuse, but it's everywhere.
It is everywhere.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, but we would love to be able to come and help train you guys, get everybody on board, and give you some skills to intervene. That would be really helpful.
Okay. Any other things before we have to end? What you'd like to share?
Stay tuned to our TikTok and Instagram.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess where can people find you?
We've
okay.
Really big on Facebook right now. We haven't done a lot on Instagram or TikTok, but we're working on it. We're going to get there.
And
our website, oh my gosh, www.hendersonhouse.org.
Okay, I'll have that link.
Lots and lots of information on there, and we try to keep it updated.
Okay. Well, thank you both so much. I think this is extremely important, extremely beneficial for us. I know we went a little bit long today, but I think this is really important for us as a community to be aware of. So thank you so much for coming today, and also just for what you do and advocating for people who are going through this.
Thank you. Will you do me a favor after this?
Sure.
Will you take some time for self-care?
I'll get some sleep.
Yeah. I can just see this is a hard subject, and I would encourage anybody after listening to abuse, that you should do something to love yourself and care for yourself, because that's what we tell all of our clients.
Well, thank you, and I will.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode. And as Letha said there at the end, this really is a heavy topic, and I would like to encourage everyone listening to do some self-care after listening to this episode. If you have a heart for the work Henderson House is doing, please go to their website at hendersonhouse.org and find ways to get involved. Also, once you're done listening, please hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss episodes as they come out. Again, this podcast is sponsored by my real estate team, the Joyful Roberts Group, and if you reach out, I'd be happy to help you with any of your real estate needs. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.